Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. We will get started in just 30 seconds. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this National AgTech Forum webinar. I'm Margie Eckelkamp. I'm editor of The Scoop at Farm Journal, which is a multimedia brand serving ag retailers, crop consultants, and farm managers. And for the past few years, Farm Journal has been a partner with the team at Ag Launch, and not only in producing our Farm Journal Row Crop Challenge, looking at emerging startups, but also getting to know the Ag Launch Farmer Network and how they are approaching the market. So really looking forward to this panel discussion today as part of the National AgTech Forum, talking about farm data and how we can unlock the next level of value. And I do want to thank our sponsors and all the partnering organizations that help make these events possible. And I also want to give a plug for the next event, which will be happening on a Tuesday. So breaking the pattern of Wednesday events, but the next event will be April 20th on Tuesday. So if folks want to check that out and get registered, we would encourage you to do so. So I'm very fortunate to be joined by three excellent panelists today for this discussion: Rebecca Carlson, PJ Haney, and Mitchell Hora, each bringing unique and distinct approaches into how they see ag data and farm data. I would like the opportunity to introduce, for our panelists to introduce themselves before we dive deeper into this discussion. And so with that, I'd ask PJ Haney. PJ, would you please tell us a little bit more about yourself, your farm, and your involvement in the National Black Growers Council?
Thank you, Margie. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Again, as Margie said, my name is PJ Haney. I'm a fifth generation row crop farmer from Eastern Virginia. My father and I grow corn, wheat, barley, soybeans here on our operation. And we have a satellite farm in Arkansas. We cover about 4 counties here in Eastern Virginia, in an area known as the Northern Neck. In addition to being a fifth generation farmer, I have the pleasure of serving as the chairman of the National Black Growers Council, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve the efficiency, productivity, and sustainability of Black row crop farmers. I, along with other third, fourth, and fifth generation farmers, chair this organization to make sure we let the agricultural community know that there's diversity in agriculture. We appreciate this partnership we have with Ag Launched and being a part of this forum and our affiliation with other companies to show that there is diversity in production agriculture. So thank you for having me, Margie. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, PJ. Next, I would like for Mitchell Hora to introduce yourself, Mitchell, and tell us not only about yourself, but also your organization with Continuum Ag.
Yeah, thanks, Margie. Really excited to jump on here today and discuss kind of what we've got going on in the soil health space. But really, when it comes to helping farmers to utilize data to drive their operation forward and utilize data um, in a way that not only helps them to make better short term decisions, to be able to manage their farm, drive better yields, drive better profitability, of course, manage fertility, manage their inputs, but now also utilize data in a monetizable fashion in the marketplace. We're going to talk a lot today, I know, on carbon and such. But I'll share a little bit of insight into Continuum Ag, share a couple slides with everybody here quick. I'm also a seventh generation farmer. I'm in Southeast Iowa, farm with my parents, about 700 acres. Last year was corn, soybeans, cereal rye, malt barley, and mustard. We're excited to get out in the fields here in another couple weeks and get ready for this year's crop. We're planning on dialing things back a little bit and focusing back in on corn, soybeans, and cereal rye here this year. But we've been experimenting a lot. We've been no-till for about 4 decades. And now this will be our 6th year, really pushing on cover crops as well. So really trying to practice what we preach on our own farm. Let me see if I can get some of these slides to go. Margie, I'll have to have you give me a confirmation that you can see what my slides here. Is there full screen? Can you still see that?
I can.
Perfect. All right. So like I said, Continuum Ag is where I spend most of my time now. We actually went through the Ag Launch program right about a year ago. And Continuum Ag really focuses in on soil health data, helping farmers to be able to understand, how do I quantify soil health? How do I understand the biology in my soil, quantifying carbon, but also, better understanding nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, pH, organic matter, micronutrients, some of these chemistry systems that we've known about for a long time and we've really focused on in agriculture. But now, with so much more of an interest on biology, we need to really bring that to the forefront. So I started Continuum Ag in 2015, helping farmers to understand and quantify soil health. We really specialize on the Haney soil health test, helping farmers to be able to just look at their soil as a living system. We were starting with the groups at kind of the lower end of this tree diagram, really at the root of this tree, where we're helping farmers, landowners, agronomists, ag companies to really be able to understand, how do we quantify soil health? How do we create a common soil language so that we can be comparing apples to apples as we're having this soil health discussion? So we started helping farmers to better understand and utilize soil sampling, help them to connect with the right data. As we built out our data set, we needed better tools. So we built the top soil tool. I'll get into that in a little bit. But what we're finding is that we need better data tools to help a farmer to understand their data and make actionable insights. But we also need to better communicate up the supply chain. So right now, Topsoil is expanding its connectivity to connect with ecosystem service markets like carbon markets, like we're going to chat on here with Nori and others here in this discussion here today. We need to better tell our story to the consumer, connect with supply chain organizations that really want to be more transparent and connect that farm story all the way through to the consumer. And we need data to be able to back up that message and to be able to drive monetary value. So we launched the Topsoil tool last April. It's the first soil health focused data platform. And now we're able to also integrate in sustainability data, create actionable precision ag for these farmers. So a key thing is, as farmers are talking about soil health and learning about implementing these principles and reducing tillage and adding cover crop, that's all fine and dandy, but it's a huge learning curve to be able to really understand how to make it work on a farm by farm basis. The Topsoil tool is a web-based system that works with ag consultants and farmers around the world to help them to really understand and utilize their data. We've built out that platform now to cover 27 states. We just added our 12th country here just a couple days ago. Basically, where farmers can go in and be able to really understand that data, but ensure that they own their information, they own their data, and they can utilize it to move their operation forward. we've continued to build out our leadership team as well, and making real progress when it comes to helping to understand scaling the science of agriculture so that farmers and agriculturalists and agronomists, they can optimize the art of agriculture. And data and startup companies and technology is awesome, but it's got to be actionable. It's got to be packaged in farmer language so that they can take it to the field and they can see the progress that they are making on their farm. So our diverse team really helps to ensure that we can make that happen. So last couple things is, focusing in on improving soil health. And as we'll have in our conversations here today, it boils down to understanding these principles of helping farmers to minimize their disturbance, armor the soil, keep living roots in the system, foster as much diversity in that system as we can, and integrate livestock. But this is unique for every single farm. But data is a way to really help to overcome the risk when adopting new practices. So farmers are really excited about carbon, about improving water quality, about improving our impact on flooding, and really being part of a solution. I think that's what this boils down to. Farmers have been looked at as those that are there to help to provide the food, fuel, and fiber for the world, but we have a lot more to offer as well. That we can help to sequester carbon at scale. We can help to improve water quality at scale. We can reduce flooding. We can help to ensure that our aquifers are going to be plentiful for a long time. And one of the most important things, and one of the things that makes me most excited, is that we can actually improve human health because we are what we eat, and the food that we put in our bodies as humans stems all the way back to those plants that are getting their nutrition out of the soil, and the microbes that are in the soil and creating soil balance is what drives that balance up the supply chain, where healthy soil creates healthy plants, creates healthy animals, healthy people, and a healthy environment. So excited to keep pulling that all the way together, and we will keep digging into that here throughout the rest of this panel. So Margie, a lot more to unpack, but we'll save it for later.
No, thank you, Mitchell, so much for that overview. And for our third panelist, Rebecca Carlson with NORI. Rebecca, would you give us an introduction to yourself as well as your organization?
Absolutely. Hello, thanks, Margie, and hi, everyone. I am Rebecca Carlson, and I'm the Agriculture Supply Lead at NORI. And my background, prior to NORI, I walked fields as an agronomist in central Nebraska, helped out my family's farm on a 5th generation corn soy operation with cattle involved. So I know my corn and beans, and I've chased and been chased by many a cows. But after that, I went back to school and did some research in sustainable agriculture at the University of Minnesota, where I received my master's, and then worked on like the software side of agriculture at MIT before coming to NORI. But at NORI, I'm on the side of helping getting that farmer language into our platform as a startup. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about NORI itself once I share my screen. Right. And everyone can see that. Okay, so unlocking the value of farm data, which Mitchell was talking about earlier, of how do we actually farmers have so much data, but what is the actual value of that besides just selling it off to other companies? And so I'll tell you what we're doing with it at NORI. So NORI is a startup, and we were actually founded in 2017 by a group of people with background in blockchain architecture, cryptocurrency, economy, climate change, and a little bit of agronomy, but I was the first that came in with a real agricultural background. But the goal of the company is to build a carbon marketplace that actually plays a role in reversing climate change. So we are bringing both buyers and sellers to the table to create this marketplace, to create these digital assets off of different types of carbon quantification. So what we're doing is issuing NORI carbon removal tons, or NRTs, which I'll probably be talking about a lot in the next hour and a half, to those who remove and retain carbon. So working with actual carbon removals, not just carbon reductions, we're issuing an NRT token. It'll be issued, and then that NRT will actually be retired on a blockchain. So as you can see in this diagram, what NORI is doing is actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and right now via regenerative farming, as opposed to just talking about reduction or just like we're not emitting as much carbon dioxide. We're actually working with folks who are taking that carbon out of the atmosphere. And so what we're trying to build is a platform that is carbon tool agnostic. So whether like the carbon's coming out via blue carbon or direct air capture, but where we're really starting is with building soil carbon in agriculture. So our first methodology, which is what really pertains to today, is looking at U.S. croplands and increasing our soil organic carbon with these regenerative practices. And we're doing that with a carbon quantification tool called Soil Metrics, and they have a greenhouse gas inventory tool, which follows Blue Book standards. So what this is doing is using farmer data to understand what kind of carbon sequestration is taking place on that parcel of land, right? So incorporating the agronomic data, which we get from the farmer, the soil data, which is from soil maps, and the weather data to actually create these quantification numbers of tools. Again, this tool is like outside of NORI. We're not creating a tool to issue NRTs. We're using pre-verified types of tools. But this idea of getting data from farmers is how do we actually, yes, bring value to the growers themselves. And I do want to point out that this farmer data is very valuable, but NORI itself doesn't own the data. We only use it to run the models to understand what kind of carbon sequestration each farmer is getting, but that the ownership of data never ever lies in the hands of NORI, because we think that adds value to the farm and don't want to step into that. So who qualifies? So it's all this talk of like carbon marketplaces. Within the NORI marketplace, we are looking for those who have adopted regenerative practices since 2010. This means that say you were like Mitch and have been no-tilling for 40 years, but in the past, in 2013, you started cover cropping. Well, that qualifies for a NORI project. And we're looking for, yes, ones that are US based. They have digital field boundaries, or we are creating digital field boundaries for each farmer, and quality farm management records. The better the quality, the better the output. Land that hasn't been in conservation reserve program in its historical land use since 2000. So we haven't like tilled up prairies basically. And then this ability to pay verification costs. So checking all these boxes of like, okay, great, I've adopted these regenerative practices. I have decent records. I'm in Iowa or wherever in the US, and I haven't had a CRP in my history, at least tilled out of that. We can then start the process of like, what does it actually take to issue these credits? The processes of NORI, we take this data collection and then enter historical farm records, regenerative switch, so that switch to regenerative practices since 2010, and then kind of project what are your expected quantificate or crop rotations will be to actually run the numbers and understand like, okay, for this set of land, we are going to get 100 NRTs, for example. Once we have done that QA and understood, run the model, we do verification. And so verification is like a farmer pays for their seed, a farmer will pay for the verification cost. This is running it past a third-party auditor who checks to make sure, okay, the information in NORI is it actually took place on their land. We have, I think, 3 verifying bodies right now that we're working with. So there's trying to, increase demand to drive down the price for farmers. But right now we're seeing it land at about $3,000 for a verification to go through. And then a farmer will sign, the primary contact for the project will sign a 10-year contract. And carbon is different than most commodities, right? Like the value of a grain is bought and sold and it's done. The value of carbon is a 10-year process. So buyers are looking to say, okay, great, I bought this carbon to offset my emissions. I don't want it to be released back in the atmosphere next year. So to bring that value, we're adding a temporal piece to our carbon sequestration. And then NRTs are issued, and then these NRTs are sold on our marketplace. And so NORI is just providing the platform for it. We're not like paying farmers. We're providing, larger companies, smaller companies, each farmer, each buyer who can access the marketplace to purchase this, whether they're offsetting a flight or offsetting shipping for their company. So with all things, like the best way to talk to farmers is to show them things that you've actually done, right? So we've done as NORI is we've actually paid 2 farmers who have adopted these regenerative practices and been a part of this process of understanding, okay, what it takes to get in, running the numbers, paying for verification, and then we have issued and paid for these 2 farmers so far. We have, I think, 3 more in our verification pipeline and a good chunk through our QA process. And we're a startup. Like I said, we started in 2017. We're like cleaning things up. It's Carbon Marketplace is the Wild West, which we'll talk about in a moment, but taking all the experience that we've had from farmers and trying to simplify the process of data entry, because 30 years of data is not an easy lift. So we're constantly learning, constantly improving. And I've said it a million times that we're here to get it right, not to be right. And so as we're learning from others, that we're refining the process and making sure it's accessible to all types of farmers. So what we're learning, like I was saying earlier, like this is our pilot phase of the Nori platform, where it is the total Wild West. I feel like there's a lot of tall tales out there with carbon marketplaces of like what we people deserve, what they can get, what kind of contracts. Like we're working in a really young field of science along with a really young market. So there's a lot to disperse and a lot to understand. But like I said, we're trying to get it right and not be right, and working with the correct people. Because that's the second point, we're value the input. So as we're building the marketplace around the buyers and the sellers, we're constantly getting this feedback so that those who are serving, farmers like PJ, farmers like Mitch, are actually their input in building the tool. And it is complicated as heck. So farm value data is so valuable, but it's not easy to access. So building tools to not only run appropriate models, but actually to help farmers not look for some receipt that was from 2002 of what kind of seed they bought. So that is the kind of like the end-to-end process of what we're doing at Nori, is providing that's the monetary value behind one aspect of monetary value behind farm data. And so if you have any questions, feel free to email us, but I look forward to our conversation we're about to have. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And with those brief introductions, I want to remind our attendees we are taking questions, and we encourage you guys to submit those as we go through our panel discussion. Please use the Q&A menu as part of the Zoom webinar platform. And then you can also upvote the questions that you think I should ask first. So, you know, your voice can be heard here, folks. Not only
Is it Margie or is it us? I think it's Margie. Well,
I think we lost Margie.
I think she's back.
Oh, am I back?
Yep.
We got you back.
Oh, excellent. No, sorry about that. So I'm going to be a little selfish, and I've got a series of questions I want to ask to the panel. But again, I encourage all of our attendees to submit their questions. So PJ, and Mitchell, I'm going to kind of focus this first question to you guys. As farmers, what does farm data, what does it mean to you?
Mitch?
You got this, PJ.
Well, farm data is really a compilation of all the work that we do, all the efforts that we put into making a crop, all the efforts that we put into growing, and that data that we try to encapsulate to really see are our production methods working for us in the soil type we have and in the environment that we're in. So, you know, that data is really vast, but at the same time is very valuable and very important. The whole key now is, you know, what do we do with this data? Because we all hear big data and what are we going to do with it? Okay. And it's more than just a yield monitor map plugged into a fertilizer rig to try to get the right amount. That data is just like any computer that you have. What you put in is what you get out. So it's important that it's entered accurately, and it's important it's entered correctly, because it's no need for it to be skewed. You want to apply the higher rate of fertilizer where you're getting the higher rate of yield in the field, for example. And you don't want that to be skewed where it is 200 feet lag in the field from where the yield is. So trying to make sure that that information is input properly is very important. But the data aspect is really a compilation on the work that we do to see if it's paying off for the various production, fertility, and agronomic factors that we equate.
Yeah, and I think, to me, you know, I'll tie this into Paul's question in the chat here too. I think is really good in that, you know, there are a lot of platforms out there already that are looking at collecting ag data, and there's new platforms coming out all the time, new sensors, imagery, technology that can help us to collect more and more and more data. But the key is, what do we do with it? How do we create action off of that data? And really, on our farm too, for the last 20 years that we've been collecting yield data, it's really only been maybe to better report to the government on how much yield we actually collected, and maybe to learn about the hybrids that we utilized, or potentially some other trials that we've implemented on the farm, and try to learn, did that hybrid work versus a competitor hybrid, and be able to make a decision on which one you're going to scale up in the coming years. So that's really been the only action coming off of the data. What I'm interested in now is that data can really become valuable. And a lot of these platforms that are out there today that a group like Continuum Ag and is competing against with our topsoil tool, most of these platforms are set up where the owners of that data are the ones who, the owners of the platform are the ones that are actually gaining the value from that data. They are learning about what are those hybrids that are working at scale. They're learning about how is those management practices working at scale. They're learning about maybe better crop modeling to be able to better play the markets at scale. Well, now farmers need to really understand how they ensure that they are also able to participate in the monetary upside with their data. What we do is we're helping farmers to actually understand how to factor in biology when you're making a decision. We've completely ignored that. And that's a huge thing. And to the question too, because I really like it. How are we different? The number one driver of fertility, or the number one driver of crop health, of soil health, of human health, the number one driver is biology. And we have completely ignored that in our agricultural management for the last multiple decades. So we have to address that. We have to address biology, and biology is what's actually driving carbon sequestration too. That actual stable carbon, stable organic matter, about 90% of it is actually microbial carcasses. So those microbial carcasses are what turns into that stable organic matter, and a portion of that being stable organic carbon. So really factoring in that biology, working with Mother Nature, not against her. I think that's where data really helps us.
Yeah, so this will be a question I'll do round robin. I'll ask each of you to answer, but I'm gonna start with you, PJ. What is your appetite? What is your inclination on how frequently you want to look at data? You want to do analytics. You want to analyze what's going on in your fields. I know you were checking weather stations earlier today, but what would be some other examples of how often you check in with farm data?
You're muted.
Sorry.
That's okay.
That question's vast, because I guess you can look at what aspect of data. So yeah, I'm allowed to monitor rainfall and wind speed from 1,000 miles away. If my guys are in the field and I can look and see, hey guys, the wind's going to kick up this afternoon. Y'all might want to shut it down by 2 or 3 before the wind speed picks up. I'm able to, that data allows us to manage better from that aspect. Personally, I enjoy the cab of the tractor with the sunshine in my face. So looking at a bunch of paper and doing data collection is not a fanfare of mine, but it's important because we need to look at that from the economic perspective. I really like to see data as I'm going across the field. The yield monitor is my best friend. So I can see what we're doing and if it's working or not working from that aspect, but I have to go dig a little deeper. I have to overlay that yield monitor with the fertility map. I have to lay the fertility with the soil map. So I have to compile layers on, and that requires a little bit of effort and a little bit of work. So I hope I answered your question without laboring too long.
No, that's great. And Mitchell, if you could provide some perspective, I have a feeling I know which way your answer is going to lean toward, but I don't want to put you in a box, friend.
No, so actually, like, my thought on this, on like the data, is actually I hate data. I love insights. I love the action. What do I do with the data? And that's why we started building Topsoil. And again, to the point of, there's a ton of other data tools out there. Why do we need another one? Well, I didn't want to build all of this soil health insights into somebody else's platform. I wanted to make sure that we controlled it and that the farmers were able to control that data and those insights. My issue was I had all this raw data coming in, all this soil data, all this data coming off of the farmers that I was consulting with. and it was just a mess. I was attempting to utilize existing data tools. I was attempting to utilize Excel files and access databases and stuff, and it just did not work. We outgrew our ability to utilize some of those platforms. So we had to go and build out our own. Now, the key thing is that we can help to easily integrate the data in. There's lots of places to collect the baseline data, to collect that yield monitor data like PJ's talking about, to collect soil sample data, to collect imagery, to collect weather data, to collect sensor information. There's lots of ways that you can get that data, but it has to get into a usable platform to integrate and layer with all of those other components so you can manage holistically, because all of those components influence the other. So that's what I need to know, how do I create action off of the data? What are the insights looking holistically? Not just here's my phosphorus number, my phosphorus data, and here's my yield goal, fill in the blank. That's not how it works. It's here's my phosphorus number, here's the weather data, here's what I already applied, here's the biology, here's the organic phosphorus that's in my soil, here's the timing of my phosphorus application that I'm going to actually make, the product that I'm using, the stabilizer that I'm adding to it, the biological that I'm putting in, the hybrid that I'm utilizing, the crop that I'm growing, the yield goal, the protein quality and content of the crop that I'm actually producing at the end of the day. The phosphorus that I actually have to apply then looks a lot different when looking holistically versus utilizing linear driven systems and only singular data points in agriculture. That's getting way too deep, Margie, but
Hey, I
that was
asked the
good. I like that
question.
because it's not just more data. We have to understand what to actually do. That's the key here going forward.
Rebecca, if you could share some insights into Nori, the data that's required and what you've learned so far in working even with those pilot farmers when it comes to their farm data.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to your original question, how often to look at it, like if I had my agronomist hat on, different. With my Nori hat on, operating with the tools that we have and understanding from a biological point of view, like Mitch has been saying, is that carbon doesn't change week by week, right? So we don't want farmers like stressing out about that, because what we're doing is trying to get that data once a year. So what we want to have that look of, when were you planted? What kind of biomass production did you have on your land? How was your soil disturbed? And yes, we could get that, as it happened, but if we get that at the end of the year, that's just like a one-stop shop of put the data through here, and then we can run the numbers. So from the tools that we're using and from the understanding of carbon like cycling, once a year of getting this kind of information is appropriate for us at this point.
Excellent. So Rebecca, I'm going to stick with you to answer this next question first. And that is, I know in your presentation, you brought up the topic or the phrase of ownership over the data. So could you share a little bit deeper dive into Nori's perspective of data ownership?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of people who are trying to get like access to data, whether that's recording or using it to run these like larger scales, but Nori only uses it, not wants to, like we only do use it to run the soil sequestration numbers. And so we run it through this platform and we spit out the numbers, and it is not ours, not in our hands. There's nothing we would do with it because there's so much other value that can come from it. And to restrict the value of a farmer's data, I think is a disservice to the farmer. So we just use it to run a model and just set it aside.
And Mitchell, if you could weigh in and maybe even wear all the hats that you wear and take those hats off as you answer this question.
Well, and maybe you need to be, I probably need it rephrased on where do you want me to angle with this, Margie?
Well, so I think it would be most interesting to get your perspective on when the word data ownership, the phrase data ownership gets brought up. How does that first strike you?
Yeah. Well, and I know there's a question in the chat here on that too. When any user creates an account on Topsoil, our data user agreement is directly on there that they agree to right away. And it states that the grower or that user, they own their data. That's super important. As a farmer myself, as an agronomist, that's really important. We clearly state on there, we can aggregate the data. We need to learn from bulk insights. We need to learn from the data at scale, but that we cannot go and sell that data, and we cannot utilize any identifying information. We can only aggregate it to such a granular scale. I don't want to get into it, but I think the key thing is, that farmer data is here and there and everywhere already. A lot of your data is already out there. It's already being utilized. Groups are already using your data, whether you know it or not. The key thing is, how do we ensure that we get to utilize it a little bit too? That we get to utilize it and utilize it for compliance in a carbon market, or utilize it when selling our grain to market, or connecting better with the consumer, or even for like government programs or for compliance purposes. Just making sure that that data is in a usable format for the grower too. We need to be able to learn from that data at scale. Other companies can help us to gain insights from it as we're integrating with them. But that grower just needs to know just where that data is going or where that data is going, and keeping track to make sure that you're working with partners that you actually trust, I think too.
PJ, I saw you nodding, so I know you have some thoughts around data ownership. And as a farmer, how are you navigating who to trust in sharing your data with? What kind of return on investment are you seeing there?
Well, as farmers, we find it very hard to just trust anyone with our data because different people have different perspectives. We don't want to, give the fox the key to the hen house, so we have to be careful on what we do. However, we want to make sure that as farmers, we get rewarded for the efforts that we make. We have the challenges of still buying wholesale, selling retail, and when I was in college, it showed that this was 20 plus years ago, it was 18 cents out of every dollar left at the farm gate. Well, we need to try to figure out how we can increase that as much as possible. So the whole carbon platform that's coming down the pike right now, we want to make sure that farmers are rewarded for their efforts. We want to make sure that the farmers, the ones who are doing the hard work, the ones that are out here beating the bushes, the ones that are doing the practices for no-till, for more environmentally friendly and more stewardship practices, get compensated for that effort. And that's where we really want to put a plug in to make sure growers are rewarded for their efforts.
And maybe, PJ, if I could have you just expand on a thread there that you started to pull, and that is, what would you share as far as the value in having farmers engaged early on in the development, not only of carbon markets, but all kinds of technologies and the insights that farmers can share and how they can help ag tech startups?
Well, Margie, that's a good question. And I've oftentimes said that there are too many people making decisions around farmers, around farming, and around us that really need our input to help them make those decisions. So yeah, we need more dirty boots around the tables that really sit down and make decisions that are going to affect farmers. How we do, why we do, what we do, that input is needed. And granted, we need all the tech components to every aspect of it, but you need that farmer perspective if it's going to be a success. So I would encourage the companies, the startups, all those that are involved to make sure you have a farmer advocate, as I called it, in the room when you're really making these decisions.
And Mitchell, if you could perhaps just share an example from your experience on how having farmer perspective really helped either elevate an idea or maybe even redirect an idea.
Yeah, I mean, with Continuum Ag, myself, my business partner, we're farmers. I'm, like I said, 7th generation. My dad has been very involved as well in helping to guide that as 6th generation farmer. But really working with our farmers, being out here in Iowa, being in the Midwest and building technologies, I think is great. But connecting with those farmers, listening to what they actually need, building some insights, building tools, then pushing it out to the live technology, to the live software like ours, and gathering feedback and listening to that farmer and really driving their pain points. So that's a part of the problem, in data for the sake of data is not good. Data for the sake of how do I actually create an insight? How do I actually make a better decision? And one of the things for us is a farmer is going to we deal mostly with conventional row crop farmers. They're going to apply fertilizer. they might as well apply fertilizer based on a unbiased, data-driven advice and an unbiased recommendation. So that's just kind of the directly solving that problem that they're gonna do it anyway. It might as well utilize better insights.
Rebecca,
Another key thing
Rebecca,
too.
if you could kind of give us a peek behind the nori curtain and maybe an example of some of those insights that farmers helped provide for your marketplace that are being implemented now.
Absolutely. Yeah, just to reiterate, I mean, I've been at so many tables, whether in academia or in like not other companies that are like, oh, that's a great idea for agriculture, super not practical, right? Like there's so many things that you're like, that's lovely, but it's not going to work. So I just always want to have that farmer opinion, whether that's my experience from before, but and running past like my family members all the time. But that's the personal side. From an actual nori side of you, like we're constantly looking for feedback. I was just on a call actually before this with a farmer in the South that we've been working with for about a year of like, well, whether it's like talking through the contract, talking through like, how are you putting this data in? Like, what are the huge hurdles? How are you thinking through how are you thinking through your data, which actually gets applied into Nori? And it was really encouraging because he was like, wow, you guys have really listened and come a long way of like how you've structured, your Nori contract that meets both the supplier and farmer side of you and the buyer side of you. That you've really helped us like think through our data and we can see numbers so we can actually make decisions. So we're a small company, so a lot of it is just listening at this point to the farmers we're working with.
And Rebecca, just to stay with you for a second, if you could share one piece of advice on how farmers should get set up for success with carbon markets with their farm data, what would you share?
Organization of data is like the biggest thing. Because I mean, at this point, there's a billion farm like software platforms and people have tried all of them, right? It's great. So how do we put that in one spot and then we know how to look at things to put it into whatever carbon marketplace? Because I think everybody at this point is using, they might be using soil samples, but also these process-based models, which are utilizing farm data to run models. That is a huge hurdle. So.
And Mitchell, perhaps through your soil health lens, where is the biggest ROI when it comes to farmers and how they invest in farm data?
Yeah. Right now, I mean, we're directly looking at how do I improve my ROI when it comes to managing fertility. We've been really trialing that out here. And to tie back in on the farmer side and on trials, working with farmers, we have trials going on through the Ag Launch Network as well. And Ag Launch helps to really facilitate a lot of those conversations. And I think that's kind of what Rebecca was getting at too on Nori and what they've gathered back from some of their Ag Launch farmers. But what we've been looking at is directly comparing head to head grid soil sampling versus zones and regular soil sampling, a traditional Mehlich analysis versus our Haney soil health analysis. We prefer utilizing zones. We utilize machine learning to build these zones and create better spatial analysis in the field. And what we find in that utilizing zones versus grids is that we can implement, utilizing zones helps us to implement the better placement component of the 4R practices. And by utilizing the Haney test and understanding biology and understanding organic nutrient and inorganic nutrient, we can better understand the right rate when implementing the 4R practices. What we have found is that nearly every time, just in better fertility management via rate and placement, a farmer can create return on investment to cover our soil sampling cost just in better fertility placement. Our soil sampling costs just shy of $10 an acre. So we're creating better than a $10 an acre value right off the bat, only in managing, typically just in managing phosphorus better. Then of course we have to drive yield. We need to work with biology, not against it. On our case study on our own farm, we've actually been able to decrease our total synthetic fertilizer by nearly 50%. We've decreased our pesticides by nearly 50%. And are maintaining record yields, utilizing that data to help us to really drive holistic ROI.
And PJ, I know spending money on the farm always comes with a critical eye. So if you had to reflect on how you've invested and how you collect and analyze farm data on your farming operation, where have you seen the highest ROI?
Well, I'll have to add to what Mitch says. It's probably in the soil sampling and fertility. Especially when we look at the variable, especially we look in the volatility of the cost. I mean, a lot of farmers can relate right now because of the cost, the recent increase in fertilizer prices. A lot of folks are really saying, okay, how many pounds could we have to gonna shave off here this year? Because that's a big component. So, some things are definitely given. You have to have seed, you have to have chemistry to hold back, but the fertility and weather for the factor, like Mitch said, the soil sensors. Do we spend money in putting out soil moisture probes, or do we just old fashioned get a guy in a pickup truck to take a loop around? Some guys who are more remote and don't have the labor pool have to rely on some technology to help mitigate some of that risk for them. Others that have the labor force and they're all contiguous and they can, look at all their land. So it's variable. It's variable to the grower, and it's not cookie cutter across the board, Margie.
Yeah, when so much of the per acre dollar goes to fertilizer, not surprising that it's high ROI when you get even more efficient with that fertilizer dollar.
Absolutely.
PJ, if you could, what might be your biggest frustration with your data today? And I'm leaving that broad on purpose, friend. Okay, so go whichever direction you want.
For me personally, we use different platforms. So, Deere harvesters, Challenger sprayers, New Holland planters, tractors with planters. I mean, it's so hard to manage the different equipment manufacturers' platforms and merge it all together. So that's my challenge, because my dad's not brand specific. He likes buying the cheapest, most efficient, and get it done type of guy. So yeah, we've got a rainbow of colors in the shed, but it all works. So trying to consolidate all those different platforms together is probably one of my personal biggest challenges, I should say.
Yeah. Mitchell, where do you see the biggest gap that needs to get filled? That's still a frustration there in the market with farm data.
Yeah, I totally agree with PJ that the integration of all of these different pools of data is a big one. Rebecca was getting on that earlier. It's something that we've really been trying to think a lot about, in making it easy for a grower to be able to get their data into a platform as simple as possible. They already have a lot going on. If they're looking at, changing their practices, if they're looking at improving their fertility management, or if they're looking at enrolling in a carbon market, it can be a really heavy lift to do some of the initial onboarding and the initial data collection that's needed. So, that's really a big thing that we're trying to help to overcome. There are data tools out there. There's companies out there that can help to make that data integration flow. But it's still finding the right ones to team up with that are going to actually make it simpler for that farmer to be able to get that data in. Again, it's get the data in that's needed so that we can start asking the right questions of the data to be able to create the insights, and that can be scaled.
Rebecca, yeah, so Mitchell was alluding to your previous answer, and I know you talked about the challenges in organizing the data. Where else are those pinch points as you guys look at really being able to scale Nori?
I don't think I'm going to say anything new. It's just getting the integration from places all over, from all these different platforms into one place that is an easy integration into Nori. So it's just disparate, and how do we consolidate it in a way that is helpful for farmers, or like easy for farmers to do and translatable.
Right. Now, is your model with Nori, are you placing boots out in the field to help farmers with that? Or how are you helping farmers get from point A to point Z?
It's a good question. So we aren't, I would love to get out and get my boots back dirty on the field, but we don't have it right now. So what we're doing is working with data managers. So people who already have those connections with farmers who are doing these practices, and training them up in a really specific way so they have the knowledge to actually aggregate the data and get it closer to the farm gate than we can get on our own with our 12 people.
Right. So PJ, I'm going to go to you. I've got a jumping off and springboarding from Rebecca's comment. How has farm data changed who you consider to be a trusted advisor for your farm?
Well, because there's so many more companies now that are servicing farmers and providing support to farmers, you have more trusted sources. Before, if it was just the fertilizer guy that's selling your fertilizer, giving you your prescription to put out fertilizer, you might question that source a little more than you would a independent, non-biased party. So that's really the door that's open for us and as farmers, that we have a lot more people who are willing to support us. And then you have guys that are and gals that are coming from across the country and they're non-competitive um, circumstances. So it's not like your neighbor's son who works for the retailer that's trying to sell you, fertility, it's fertilizer. So those doors open up and makes it more of a trusted source.
And Mitchell, how have you seen the evolution of farm data change who's defined as a trusted advisor?
Utilizing those trusted advisors, utilizing the relationships in agriculture is the key. And that's actually really how we focused on building out Continuum Ag, is that we're a SaaS company where we utilize our software to help that relationship flourish and to help that agronomist, whether it be a independent crop consultant, a independent seed company, independent ag retail, those boots on the grounds, they need to be able to scale that relationship with their farmer. They are already having conversations about a wide array of topics all the time. The farmer already has a ton of different things to think about. The agronomist already has a ton of different things to think about, and they have to think about it for lots of different farmers. So we need to help them to really scale. And again, it's scaling those insights. It's scaling the science of agriculture so those farmers and their advisors can optimize their localized art of agriculture. And that's really the key. But I think that's what we found here. And as startup companies, we need to really think about our go-to-market strategy and utilizing and leveraging those local relationships that are already there. And that's where I do like, what Nori's doing and their data managers and where we can help those farmers to be able to get their data in, make it simple, ensure that they trust where the data is going. And then we can help to hold their hand as they look forward in what's next, what's the next opportunity for my farm. And that really helps to strengthen and build those relationships.
So I know the main prong that we were really trying to explore today was farm data. And then we very quickly got into the discussion around specifically this promise of carbon. And not just because Rebecca's on the panel, but because it is a big topic today. So Rebecca, I'm going to pitch this first question as we dive a little deeper to you. And that would be, why now? Why is now the time for everyone to really train their eye with what's going on with carbon?
It's a good question, because carbon markets aren't actually new. They've been around for maybe like 20, 25 years or so, and they've tanked each time. So why is now different? Why is it now not just a trend? And I think that comes down to is the public is becoming aware that this is such an important part of their ecological stewardship of their company to offset these emissions, to whether they voluntary or involuntary need to have this cap. So this public engagement with the carbon markets is actually driving it forward. And it's from a private point of view with companies itself. It's also from a public point of view as well. And we've learned, right? We've learned a lot from what's gone wrong in the past and have built, fraud gates, right? To make sure that we're building something that is truthful.
And Mitchell, I know that you have done your own work in many of these different ecosystems. What's your main takeaway that you would share?
Yeah, a big one is the interest from farmers is overwhelming. I think that's a huge takeaway. The interest from now the government side of things too, and from the taxpayers, looking at how do they get involved and how do we look really holistically at this. So I think that's a big takeaway. But also a huge takeaway for me in these markets is I better get on my soapbox here a little bit, Margie. So I think a lot of them, we're looking at this wrong. We're looking at carbon markets and we're looking at these systems and enrolling farmers as the carbon markets today are really cost share for practice change, where we're looking at as we need to continue to drive improvements on the farm. We need to help farmers to reduce tillage, add cover crops, decreases their synthetic nitrogen. But I really think that as we drive forward here, that it shouldn't be how many boxes can you check, and there's only certain boxes, and you have to kind of stay within the box in order to check that box. The constraints are there, and that's where some of the models and stuff today, the data tools of today, they're really not fully ready for all this interest that's coming at them. And that's where, of course, our buddy Lauren here on the chat and stuff too, pointing towards some of that the farmer should be getting paid for what is their net annual carbon sequestration. What is their actual footprint? What's their actual net bottom line? Not just looking at carbon mitigation on being able to change practices, but what's your actual sequestration? And that's a biological system. And that's the further you can drive, the more innovative you can be, the further along the continuum you can get, the more you can really sequester on an annual basis. And I think that's what we need to be looking at here. If these systems are really going to scale, is are we really solving the problem? And in order to do that, we have to sequester carbon, not just mitigate the losses. But I think that's a key thing as we drive this further and as more people come to the table, is how do we really do it smart and make sure that this is going to be bulletproof? It's going to be long-term, economically sustainable, and that farmer innovation can flourish. And I think the more creative we can get with this to get rid of the boxes and allow farmer innovation to drive this, that's what's going to make these opportunities huge. And it's around carbon markets, but it's nutrient density, it's driving yields too. I mean, that's where the innovation has been for the last multiple decades. And there's a lot of problems that we can solve in agriculture if we really tap into that innovation.
So let's corral this just a little bit, Mitchell. And Rebecca had shared earlier, just as far as this is a young science, right? And as you said multiple times, this is a biological system. So what farm data is going to be required for us to achieve what you just outlined?
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah. So I think, right now we can quantify carbon in the soil. We can utilize dry combustion organic carbon sampling. We can utilize bulk density sampling. It's going to cost a lot of money. And a lot of time, the equipment's not out there. The labs do not have the capacity to be able to do all the sampling that's needed. So we're only really going to be able to get so far. What I'm interested in is, can we utilize some of the current systems? Can we utilize the soil sampling that's available today, that is science-backed, that is the standard, utilizing some of those systems? And can we utilize the model, but can we reverse engineer them to systems that are easier to adopt at scale? Can we better correlate the stable organic carbon that's down to 1 meter deep? Can we correlate that back to being able to actually sequester it on an annual basis? Correlate that stable carbon back to organic matter, and that organic matter back to the microbial activity and the organic carbon, the water extractable organic carbon that leads to those stable organic matter and stable organic carbon. So it's looking at the leading indicators to carbon sequestration. The leading indicator to carbon sequestration is photosynthesis. That's how the carbon gets there. That is how the carbon gets out of the atmosphere and gets put into the soil. Plants are the driver. And then the more efficient you can get at it is the more aggressive you can get with your cover crop by utilizing relay cropping, interseeding, multi-species. And the more aggressive you can get by stimulating the biology, which is utilizing that carbon that is emitted into the soil as plant root exudates. So the more we can drive that system, the more aggressive we can get, the better. And that's part of the issue here, is that the models today do not reflect that overlap of being able to continue to drive mass photosynthesis and allow natural systems to be able to really flourish here.
Okay, so PJ, Mitchell just broke it down about everything we're going to have to do and all the science we're going to have to nail down. And so far, the approach has been, let's create these market opportunities rather than regulations to get farmers to help us sequester carbon. But for you, what's that tipping point? What's going to get you most excited to really engage in this space and think that it's worth it?
Well, I think for a lot of growers, it's the risk over the reward, and you have to weigh out the economies of scale. Now, growing up as a winter wheat grower who no-tills 2/3 of their soybeans, it's a no-brainer for me because that's the climate that I live over here in Eastern Virginia. That's what I've always done. That's what I cut my teeth in. We have enough roll and well-drained drainage to get water off the fields. But yet you go to the Delta and it's a different story. Guys are looking to burn off straw so they can, dry the ground out and get fields and get better seed to soil contact. So it depends on where you are, and it's more application specific. But in my line, in my experience, dangling the carrot is what makes the horse run. And when we can incentivize farmers to do something and they are rewarded for their work, you can get a lot more people on the wagon a lot easier that way. And that's my thing. I think folks want to do it. A lot of farmers want to participate, but they want to know how much extra work am I going to put in here? And then the reward. Oftentimes farmers we've been made promises that some have yet to be seen. Okay. So is this just another pipe dream that's going to come down the line and we're going to do this work and then we've got to go chase the car to get paid for our work? So I think it's going to entail a lot of effort and a lot of assurance to the farmers and a lot of trust that they're going to be rewarded for what they do.
So Rebecca, you described this space as a little bit of the Wild West. So what developments are you looking for in the next 5 years to claim the territory?
Okay. Well, I think it's not just like we claim the territory, it's that the science progresses, that we understand more, right? So we have to start somewhere, and we're using from like the innovations in the ag point of view, we're using kind of archaic tools, right? I've had a committee member once who's like, in agriculture, we're like measuring to like the exact millimeter to like make a cut, and then they come in with a chainsaw, right? So like we're coming in with like even thicker than a chainsaw to try to make these models work and models run, but they are running. And so like PJ was saying, the more it works, the more people want to be a part of it. And then the more funding goes to it. The more funding goes to the academic research tools that can help us understand where the soil organic carbon goes. The number of trials that we have below 30 centimeters that are like replicable for farmers to make good like deep soil things are really small. So if we can drive the interest, to drive the funding, to get better tools through our institutions and through across the board, that is helpful for everyone. So we can pick up these nuances of that farmers are doing in the field right now.
Mitchell, if you had to make one prediction for the next 5 years, what would you share?
Holy smokes. I mean, I have no idea. This is changing incredibly quickly. This is going really fast. I do think though, in the next 5 years, we are going to figure out how to really be creative in this. I do think there's going to be real opportunity. The stars are aligning and in this, and it's the right timing. Rebecca was talking, some of these things that we're talking about, they're not new. Cover crops are not new. Carbon markets are not new. Some of these technology things, data, it's not new. It's just the stars are aligning in our ability to actually really go and utilize it. So I'm really excited over the next 5 years for agriculture and the farming community and stuff to really become a lot more sexy too, is a lot of what this is getting to, that there's a lot more interest in it. And COVID actually has probably accelerated some of that. It's one of the very few decent things that's come out of COVID, is that we are really being looked at now as agriculturalists as that help, as that solution to a lot of problems. So I'm excited for the future in that standpoint, but also for farmers to really continue to lean on each other. The resources are out there, the farmer interest and being able to work with other farmers, being able to access real insights and actually be able to drive long-term profitability on your farm. The tools are there for farmers to be able to really go and drive that. So, but a key thing on that, as more farmers along the adoption curve start to make changes and start to become more involved, I want to make sure that we don't drive division, that everybody can participate in this. Not everybody's going to go full no-till regenerative organic right away. Not everybody's going to go to no-till and cover crops right away, but every single farm can drive a 10% improvement on their farm, no matter where you're at along the starting line.
Well, you guys have been so generous in answering my questions and providing your insight. So thank you so much. I'm going to transition to our audience questions even a little bit earlier than we were planning to, just because we've gotten so many. So please keep those coming in. I want to make sure that we have enough time for everybody's questions. Obviously, I have lots of questions. So if we have extra time at the end, I've got more. But I do want to pose this probably to Rebecca and then Mitchell, if you could. And that is, what has been your team's experience in getting farmers to trust you with their data? How do you alleviate their concerns about how you are using the data and protecting their interest in the process?
Conversations and showing what we do. So we are really upfront about that we don't use it. It only goes here, and it's like one of our core things that we aren't using it. So because we're small enough, it's really just been conversations with farmers or conversations with people the farmers trust. So if we are talking to them, and it's not even a convincing, it's just like, we don't do anything. We just run it for the model. And then they convey that trust to the farmers themselves.
Yeah. And for me, I think it's being, ultra transparent that farmer, you own your data. We are using it to aggregate. And that's why you're coming to us, is because we are utilizing the data. We're utilizing everybody's data here to be able to help each individual to be able to drive better insights. As we're looking at soil biology or quantifying our carbon or whatever, we need to be able to go to any farm and cross correlate it to the bulk data set to be able to create a better starting point. That most farms don't have their carbon data, and they have not quantified the stable carbon in their soil. Most farms have not quantified the biological activity in their soil. Well, we can say, farmer, you can take one sample or take a sample one time and cross correlate it to our data set and have a really solid idea of where you're at. And also, we hit on it earlier, utilizing those relationships, utilizing the people that are helping farmers to navigate their data space. That's been huge for us. And we've had good success in working with farmers in that capacity.
Excellent. And Mitchell, I think you answered this question while I was having my technical difficulties. So thank you for moonlighting as moderator. I owe you one. Rebecca, to you, this question came in and it says, it seems that many of the ag data tools are being developed for large major row crop farms and less applicable to smaller or specialty crop farms. Is this also your experience? It may take time for these tools to be tweaked to be of use to smaller farms. How and when do you see these being of value to small farms, many of which are owned by minorities?
That is a question I really struggle with, because right now, I mean, the funding has always gone to corn and soy, right? Like, we don't have like a huge national miscanthus growers association that can really fund these amazing complex research projects so we can understand the modeling of a specific thing. So yes, we are dealing a lot with corn and soy growers right now, but the access to these smaller farms is back to what I was saying earlier, is if we're doing something that works, it drives better funding towards understanding these things on a greater scale. We're also working with trying to understand what kind of soil sampling we can do, so then we're not relying on models that aren't robust enough to run these carbon quantification numbers off of. So then we can go to the farm itself to get those kind of numbers. But again, that takes time to determine what is equitable for all parties involved, and that is scientifically appropriate for soil sampling to build these numbers. But we have, in our tools that we do have, we are trying to run these numbers, and maybe they aren't as good as what we would expect. But as NORI, we have a part of our clauses, if we have better tools, say like 7 years in, we'll back issue NRTs running the newer tools of what happened like this year. So we leave room to say, when there are improvements, we want to say thank you for trusting us now, but we'll also back issue to help these smaller farmers and different niche crops, because I mean, farming isn't just corn and beans. There's just so many things, and we really want to be accessible to all farmers.
Yes, and I think our attendee also wanted that question answered by PJ. PJ, your experience on seeing ag data tools developed for large versus perhaps smaller scale farms.
Well, most of the constituents I work with are row crop growers. So corn, wheat, peanuts, cotton, soybeans, and regardless if they're 400 acres or, some of our growers are north of 10,000, it's all based on a per acre return. So when we look at being as farmers, yes, it's about the scale and the size. And we know that, the larger percentage of farmers get most of the proceeds and funds that are directed to farming. But from a grower, I think we look at this from the perspective is this can benefit what I'm doing on every acre I have, every unit that I'm selling. So it's ROI that each grower can get in. Yeah, and of course it's a scale. You're quantified a lot more on 10,000 acres than you are 1,000, but you are getting return on the base 1,000 that you are. So I think if anybody can look at reducing inputs and increasing outputs, farmers are gonna weigh that in.
And maybe as a follow-up, if I could ask you, PJ, what are your thoughts as far as pricing models in light of that and in terms of per acre fees or what do you see there?
Well, it can be priced to whereas a grower who's 400 acres can't afford it and a grower that's 4,000 can. So I think as farmers look at this, they have to look at the return on ROI, but the companies that are offering this service to the farmer, they need to look at it from that perspective as well. Everybody wants to participate. It's just that some growers can't get in at the level that others can. So fairness needs to be across the board. And it's really, instead of what growers pay, is what they're rewarded. So, instead of farmers getting hit with upfront costs in the beginning, if they know they're getting rewarded in the end, regardless if they're doing it on 100 acres or doing it on 1,000, they're still seeing reward for the work that they're doing. So if we look at this as far as what we're going to offer the farmers instead of what we're going to charge the farmer, that's more of a fair conversation.
And PJ, do you currently, another attendee question was, do you currently use tissue sampling in your agronomy management?
We do, especially for our winter wheat applications, our winter wheat crop, winter wheat and barley, we do tissue sampling. So we'll know, what our micronutrient needs are. So we'll know, at weeks 3 or 4, when we need to start applying, our split nitrogen application. So we do tissue sampling primarily in wheat and barley.
And Mitchell, do you currently use tissue sampling? And if so, what timing and what crops?
Yeah. No, we utilize tissue sampling a pretty good amount. And we have done weekly tissue sampling as well. We've done a lot of weekly soil sampling, actually, weekly Haney testing, really trying to understand nutrient tie-up and release in cover crop situations, especially a lot of cover crop trials. We've done tissue sampling on an array of those as well. And really, it's just more data to be able to map it out. And like PJ was saying, being able to really manage in season, being able to manage fertility and fend off disease at the correct timing. So I think tissue sampling is a good way to be able to utilize that, something that can be really actionable as well. So that's why I do like tissue sampling too.
Rebecca, a question came in for you, and that is, what verifying bodies does NORI currently use?
We use Aster Global, Validus, and SEC. Right.
And Mitchell, I think this is the question you may have answered a little bit earlier as far as management zones versus grid sampling. Anything else you'd want to add there as far as preferences, pros and cons?
Yeah, nature doesn't work in a straight line. That's why we use management zones.
And PJ, do you use management zones or grid sampling? And is it different at your operation in Virginia versus your acres in Arkansas?
Yeah, we pretty much use zones across the platform. We've used grids across the platform in both states. We have tried a Varus machine with zones up here, and that worked for us to tell the different electroconductivity of the soil types, because we have more variance here in Virginia in our sandier soil profile than we do in the Delta. So we've mixed it up and used both.
Yep. So we do, PJ, have a follow-up question for you on some of your previous comments, and that is, Are there upfront financing mechanisms rather than marketplaces that would incentivize farmers to adopt more of these ag practices? And I'm interpreting ag practices as anything that could be deemed as conservation oriented.
Well, I don't know of too many upfront ones because most of the practices I'm aware of are farmers are compensated for the work that they do. For example, conservation practices through NRCS, your conservation, your stewardship, whether you're cover cropping and you have to pretty much determine that cover crop is established before you're allowed to spray and kill it. Even in our vertical tillage platform that we use, we have to show that we have 20% residual left in the field. Even with our nitrogen injection application versus broadcast, all of these methods, all of these practices that are part of CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program by the NRCS, are based on a reward after that work is done.
And I think to help illuminate maybe the issue here a little bit, could you share how you're documenting those practices? Like you're saying 20% residue, direct manure injection, and how you're providing that within the framework of those programs?
Well, for NRCS purposes, a lot of that work is come out and check behind the farmer. Satellite imagery determines a lot of fields and how it's done. But basically, as farmers, you report your practices, and oftentimes you're checked or spot checked for make sure that's done. But you self-certify the practice that you have used on your farm. For liquid injection, everybody sees you with a knife rig out in the field, or people see you purchase liquid 32% or 30% for your side dress. So, but most of it is what we as farmers, just like all the other paperwork that we do, we certify most of the work for FSA and NRCS, so all that self-certified.
Excellent. Thank you, PJ.
Margie, I want to dig a little deeper on getting farmers paid up front here on this one, because I think it's a huge opportunity that I want to make sure that we do add more color on too. I think the ability for some of these companies to kind of like forward contract carbon credits is like going to be a real thing. And being able to get a grower like PJ and myself and others being able to help to fund the transition and get dollars to those farms up front. When you are enrolling in these programs, when you're changing something up on your farm, the cost is up front. The rewards come over time. We know that implementing regenerative ag or transitioning to organic or lots of different options, they can have really good monetary upside and they can be self-sustaining on the farm, but the cost is up front. The cost to change equipment, to learn a totally new system, a different paradigm shift to your farm, the cost is up front. I do think there's opportunity here for more institutional financing to be able to fit into that as well. Longer term operating agreements is another one as well, just through your banking relationship. Working with longer term contracts for your rental agreements too, that saying, hey, we are going to go on a longer term journey here. I've got some longer term financing, but I need a longer term agreement on my rental contract so I can help to invest in that land with you. So really interesting that on what's going to happen here, again, as agriculture becomes part of a wide array of solutions.
No, thank you for weighing in there, Mitchell. And it feeds so well into the question we got from Lauren for Rebecca. And he wanted to clarify, did he correctly hear you say a 10-year look back? So does that mean you're paying the last 10 years? And if so, what is the maintenance period? How many years do we need to control and maintain a practice?
So our look back period is that we can accept changes to regenerative practices since 2010, but then we're paying for 5 years of that. So again, it's balancing that what the buyers are wanting and what the suppliers have done. So that's accepting changes since 2010, but only issuing NRTs since 2016. So then from the day that they're issued, so in 2021, we have a 10-year contract for that. So we're saying that because the value of this data is over time, like the incremental soil organic carbon changes are over time, and that's what the buyer is wanting, that we're saying we need to have the data put back into Nori just to say that, okay, we haven't actually like tilled up the field for no apparent reason. There, we have force majeure clauses because weather is unpredictable and those kind of things, but saying that we're maintaining these practices for the duration of this 10-year project. And so every time that NRTs are issued, then you sign a new 10-year contract as well, because that's where the value to the buyer is. And so we're not prescribing saying like, you have not, like you must do this, this, and this. As not all we're doing. You're just saying continue as is, and we'll see how the numbers change. And again, when if they go up, then we back issue what you had. And if they go down for whatever reason, we do have an insurance pool.
And Mitchell, you were nodding a little bit. Have something to add?
Well, I think the main thing on that, like, you know, Nori, all of these different markets have a little bit different look back period, and some of them, you know, being able to get you paid for what you've already done. But a lot of these farmers, you know, a lot of the guys that I work with have been implementing these sustainable practices for a long, long time, multiple decades. And that benefit that they've already created, I don't know that, you know, they're not going to get paid via carbon for some of those things. And even my farmers today, a lot, I'm saying the look back periods are probably not going to be there forever, even to look back a couple of years. But if we were looking at here's your actual annual sequestration, then they're going to be further ahead. Those farmers that have been doing this for a long time, those leaders in the space that have been adopting these systems, my argument is that the farmers that have been doing it for a long time are actually sequestering maximum amount of carbon on an annual basis. That they are the ones that really can help to solve the problems quickly. And but if we were to look at it a little bit different, then they could really be part of the solution, and they can help to bring others around as well, because the knowledge and the know-how and the hurdles that they've already overcome over multiple decades can be utilized to educate others to help and make this really scale.
And Rebecca, as a follow-up, an additional part of that question was, how does your model compare to the COMET model others are using? And the commentary they also provide is it seems that COMET needs major updating, so our existing practices are easier to apply.
Yes, so we are using Soil Metrics, which is the commercial arm of Comet Farm. So the same scientists that did that have created Soil Metrics in their greenhouse gas inventory tool. However, because we're a private organization using it for profit, and this is a public facing USDA ARS tool, we're not technically using the Comet Farm model, but the same foundation is what we use. And it like I was saying before, it is that like acts going in trying to make these models are a bit outdated, but they are what work. And the more that we're using them, the more funding will go to increasing their use.
Excellent. PJ, we had a question come in, and the question centers around foreign investment in US farmland, and if that may impact the data platforms that are being used and the data being captured. I'm curious, do you currently rent ground? And what is your relationship with landowners and the farm data when you make a pass across their land?
Well, typically, yes, to answer your question, I do rent land, and typically in a cash rent basis, that landowner expects you to provide the best farming practices and maintain and take care of their land as you would your own. So in that regard, we don't really get into the data sharing with the landowner on what practices that we're doing. They want to see their land looking good. They want to see their crops looking good, and they compare you to the neighbors. Hey, Charlie's doesn't have weeds over there. Why do you have weeds? You know, those are the type of questions you get sometimes. Or, I'm glad my field doesn't look like his field. You know, they're so I don't know how some other growers in different parts of the country do, and because the relationships that we have with landowners or how we have them are structured that way. But I don't know, or I don't foresee that being a real big factor with. And especially when you have a lot of absentee landlords, you know, the folks
Right.
that aren't really on the farm and they aren't really there and they're not really tuned in. I don't know how hands-on they would be or receptive or care for that aspect. But I think they would appreciate knowing that we're doing our part as farmers to take care of their land and to be better stewards of the environment. So I think it's some reward there.
No, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. One more question came in for you, Mitchell and Rebecca, and that is, there are already many technical platforms on the market to provide growers with actionable data to make decisions. So what are the differentiators of Topsoil and Nori? And what will prevent competitors from replicating your service model?
I already kind of hit on ours quite a bit, but the main thing that we boil down to is we're looking at the soil as a living, dynamic continuum. Everyone else looks at it as a dead, static growing medium. We've got to factor in biology, and we need to integrate in all these other tools and actually provide the actionable insights that can really drive a grower's ROI. And we can pull that data back through, loop it back through to actually prove the concepts and actually prove that the value is really there.
And then we are working with so many different software platforms. So we're pretty agnostic on a lot of our fronts, but like who we work with, we want to work with as many people as we can. So I think that also gives us an edge as well, because it broadens our scope and brings more perspective to the table. And I don't know, I find like if carbon markets work and there's more than one carbon market, there's more than one kind of farmer. So if we have different things that meet different needs, by golly. But I'm not the business person, so that's all.
Wow. I mean, you guys are an awesome trio. I'm going to have one more question before we log off of this webinar, and I'll go round robin, and PJ, I'll start with you. And that is, I always like to leave panel discussions on perhaps a more optimistic note, a positive note, if you will. And that is, could you share the biggest opportunity you see for farm data?
Well, I think the opportunity here in this discussion for farm data is to establish some trust factors with growers. I think there's opportunity for farmers to be taught the value in what they do and how it works. Oftentimes we just judge what works by the yield, how the crop looks. But Mitch can attest to this, that there are a lot of factors working below the soil that we don't see. So if we can showcase to farmers what they're doing works and what they are doing, you'll get more buy-in in that aspect. The other part is, I think a lot of companies now, they have the need for growers to participate in various platforms for surveys and checks. And I think we need to recognize the diversity that still exists in production agriculture and make sure that is continued across all the trials and platforms that exist. And that's gender, that's race, that's ethnicity, that's size, that's scale. We need to make sure that diversity exists. Diversity exists in the consumption of what we do. So diversity needs to get into, go into what the testing and the work on what we do.
Mitchell, biggest opportunity with farm data?
Yeah, no, I think for me, the whole goal is helping those family farms to become more economically resilient and environmentally sustainable. And data is what drives us to be able to do that. When farmers have dollars in their pocket, and when farmers are better equipped to make decisions, to run their companies, to run their family farming operations, when farmers are better equipped to be able to make more money, what do farmers do with their dollars? They invest back in their family operation. They invest in their rural communities. They invest in their churches and their schools and build up that rural vitality to be able to help to continue to carry things on for future generations. There is a lot of land that's going to be switching hands over the next coming decades. There's going to be a lot of innovation. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for farmers. But in order for those farms to stay in the hands of families, they've got to be able to have dollars in their pocket, and we can help to equip them to utilize data to ensure they're ready for the opportunity.
And Rebecca, final say, you get it, girl, but biggest opportunity with farm data?
To enroll in Nori, of course.
Well-placed promotion.
Yeah. But really, I mean, back to what Mitch was saying, this opportunity to like use data to like bring the sexiness back to agriculture so people are staying on the land, like bringing that innovation so we can unlock potential people aren't just like constantly leaving, but actually going back and bringing that vitality back to small towns. That's something I think farm data will really drive. So that'll help.
Yeah, no, I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. I want to thank our panelists for sharing your guys' insights. Really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to our host and to our sponsors, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon.
And thanks, Margie, for moderating.
Oh, thank
Margie, you did amazing.
Thanks, Margie. Great job.
Checks in the mail.
Fantastic. Now to the after party.
There you go.
Bye.